Have y'all ever felt like some spells in Wizard101 are a complete waste of pips? Y'all know the ones I'm talking about. The ones gathering dust in your spellbook, never seeing the light of day. Well, today, I wanted to talk about the forgotten spells that especially tick me off and what Wizard101 could do to make them usable, to reinvigorate the gameplay on the game we all love. I'm starting right off with my biggest issue right now, the most forgotten spell mechanic, absorbs. Now, absorbs aren't just something you'll find on an ice wizard like the one that you see here. You can see absorb spells actually being forgotten on the life and mid school. But basically, what absorbs do, they subtract damage instead of reducing incoming damage by 1%. So let's say that I cast an ice armor for 2 pips. I would subtract incoming damage by 250 flat. It's a pretty cool concept. It used to be used a lot where one of the only things you could ever do was like steal it, and then you might even have a chance to steal it right back. But nowadays, with spells that get rid of multiple shields all at once for as simple as 2 pips like Fire Elf, or even spells that do more than that like Elephant, putting all of your pips into a single shield just to subtract damage is just not worth it for X pip absorbs like Ice Armor or even the better Frozen Armor. What's weird is that the absorbs don't just stop at those two. We have spells like Celestial Intervention, which expects you to give up 4 pips to have 1,000 absorb on yourself. Grendel's Amends, especially the bottom path if you were to use it, is a double absorb, so I guess it's a little bit less removable, but still, it's 5 pips just for 1,000 absorb. Absorbs actually used to be really fun late game when you needed to subtract damage more than anything else. They actually had a place in the meta, but ever since shield removal spells have been introduced, they've been basically forgotten. I think what they could really do to these is honestly very similar to how they treat a lot of hanging effects in this game in big old 2025. Whenever something has a lot of value, instead of making it all go into one hanging effect, they dilute it into multiple hanging effects. You actually see this example with all kinds of modern spells. For example, Elephant, right? They don't want the overtime that's created for clearing shields on the spell to be too much into one overtime after a certain point. If y'all don't know how the spell works, right? For every shield you clear with this, you make a damage overtime that grows more powerful, and up to 4 shields, right? You actually start racking up value in 1 dot, but the second you hit that 5th shield, there's so much value in terms of damage and the dot that you're making for clearing 5 shields that the damage actually gets split into 2 dots. If Elephant were to clear 10 shields in a hypothetical world, you would hit a point at some point after clearing enough where you would make 3 dots. I think they need to do 2 things. 1, make absorbs actually start off by making more copies, make them stackable, and also for X pip absorbs, make them make more and more absorbs the more pips that you make. But if I'm putting 14 pips into this spell, I better get a lot of shields. It should be something that actually is hard to counter unless you have a really punishing shield counter. And I do think it's important that it is stackable, right? Let's say, for example, to make this a better spell, they made it into 2 absorbs that did around 500 each. I do think if you did like a 1200 damage hit, it should still do 200 damage to you after you use the spell. You're using pips. It's a lot of pips, and unfortunately, it's just not that usable if it doesn't create enough copies and stack. The fact that Life also has an absorb mechanic that's just literally not, like, you know, they don't explore it whatsoever, it is really crazy to me. I think at some point, they really got to revisit this as a concept. The next thing on my list of things that have become useless, bubbles. Now, obviously, especially if you PvP, you already know that the 2 pip bubbles and even hit and bubbles, those are fine, those are usable, those are not a complete waste of pip. But Wizard101 tried something many years ago in Chrysalis where they tried to introduce a new bubble that you could use, and the twist was that it gave things like crit and pierce. Now, in my opinion, this is useless for multiple reasons. 1, compared to the 2 pip counterpart, obviously, it's an extra round of waiting for a comparable buff. And 2, I would also argue that things like pierce and critical aren't really that useful, right? Like, most things that you fight, especially in PvE, where I would argue this is way more usable, most things that you fight, the 20% crit change isn't actually gonna really matter, and you're probably gonna pierce through most of their resist, and even if you don't, you're gonna end up prisming as a result, probably. But it's so crazy. They're acting like pierce, damage, and crit are the only good reasons why anyone would want a bubble. I feel like bubbles could have literally endless possibilities, and I really think they ought to make more 2-pip bubbles. Now, I do think there's a caveat that's needed. Bubbles already ran into a big issue that they actually more or less resolved in PvP anyway. And I don't know if y'all remember the era before they did this, before they capped bubbles at 4 per deck, right? People used to pack these in side deck. These are banned in side deck now as well. People used to have them in main deck with like 10 of them in their decks, and games would come down to bubble into the bubble into the bubble back and forth for dozens of rounds, and nothing would happen. I think this little 4 cap, and also including hidden bubbles in side deck and also up to 6 in main deck, I think that's fine. But if they were to add more 2-pip bubbles, I think 2-pip bubbles as a total in PvP should only be allowed up to 4, or maybe as they introduce more, maybe like up to like 5 or 6, right? Maybe they could like kind of increase the cap as they add more bubbles, but I do think the cap should prevent people from just bubbling back and forth forever, because that's just annoying. But I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on what y'all think they should do with bubbles. I'd love to see defense bubbles. I'd love to see shad rating bubbles now that we're going to be seeing new things you could do with shads. I think pip gain bubbles that add on to this idea of pip chance we see in power play would be really, really cool to see with some niche strategy. It's a very unexplored concept, especially in PvE. I think bubbles need a huge revamp. Next on the list of forgotten spells that desperately need a buff, I think Wiz seriously needs to consider revisiting minions for both PvP and PvE. Minions, these have become completely abandoned in Wizard101. They became no PvP because some of them were spammable to a fault. Also, in PvE, a lot of these minions, they're actually pretty decent early game. I want to say Gala minion, Sprite Guardian, Mander minion. These are good examples of minions that you actually are going to see some use out of, especially in Arc 1. But as you go further and further up the ladder, right, in Wizard101, the name of the game turns into like fainting and buffing and universal buffs and school-specific buffs, right? When you're doing all of that, you're setting up a big hit, especially with things like feints. Any minion that hits will compete with that, right? Like if I'm fainting and then a helpful Mander goes out of its way to Locust Swarm my feint off, I'm not going to be happy. They kind of added another minion that people could use that you could get in Zafaria. I don't know if y'all remember that little experiment. And yet those kind of don't really see that much use. Maybe I'm living under a rock when it comes to those, but I'm gonna assume it's because they also compete with your buffs anyway. Now it's weird. Wiz has a very easy solution to this already in the form of spellaments. Let's say spellaments, acquiring them wasn't an issue, right? I think they could easily make minion spellaments that maybe not even have 2 branches, but have so many different branches that you could fully customize a minion-based build. I'd love to see them flesh this out for mid, especially because it's such a minion school. Right now, the one example we have of being able to create 2 different types of minions using spellaments is Cyclops minion, but this is just not well done at all. I'd say Cyclops minion is way better than Cyclops ally. It blades traps, and it could also like donate power and heal. Cyclops ally, it seems to just spam cleanse charm, and that's about it. It barely does anything else that you want. It's like very shocking how bad the bottom path of this is. So yeah, use this feature, use it for multiple schools, but please do it better than whatever we got with this, because I just don't think it was good at all. Now, the bright side about this specific forgotten spell is there is confirmation that the devs are considering a minion audit at some point. It might tie it into the Rochambeau system that they've done, especially with one spellman path. So like a trap-based school like Myth might get a minion that uses a lot of traps, and then you could use your trap-based utility, right? Maybe there could be a dot spamming fire one. There could be stuff that we could really see, and then we could, like, you know, use the fact that the minion's setting up stuff to do more damage than we otherwise would. But I'd love to see one for PvE that's different than PvP. One that acknowledges the fact that PvE is so much more about buffing and not having your minion take those buffs. And finally, something that I'm actually gonna lump all into one big category: stalling spells. And I didn't really know how else to classify them, but I'm talking about the classics: Beguile, Stun, Smokescreen, Mantle. And by stalling spells, these are spells that you will see throughout the game, pretty much on every single school. I'm talking about spells that eventually stop working as you level up through the first couple of arcs. Why is that? Because these spells, while they are really cool, for example, Beguile makes the target help you for a round. And Stuns and Mantles, obviously, these are great because they could buy you an extra turn. As good as those are, a lot of the times, Mantles are just not good enough to rely on. Stuns and Beguiles end up being something that bosses and minions alike are immune to by the time you get through the first couple of arcs. This is the only category of spells in this whole video that I think is kind of a lost cause. I think this is something that they just need to, like, make it do a new utility that's in the spirit of what it used to do, right? Maybe Beguile, instead of being a target helps you for 1-round spell, maybe summon a minion to go on the target side that maybe messes with them. I feel like that could be cool. Maybe stuns could become something that, you know, instead of making your opponent lose a turn, maybe like it does something about their pip gain, maybe it does something about their ability to draw, which could be cool in PvP. And mantles, I don't know if you could ever really do this, but it would be cool to see mantles be a thing where maybe it makes it so that if you discard one thing, it might actually discard another, almost like when you lag on Wiz, right? Something like that. Obviously, these are all ideas that could be abused and could break the game. So if King's ever does this, I hope they have like a hotfix patch right ready to go right next to it in case this breaks the game. But I'd love to see some innovative stuff like that that even makes things in PvE act different as a result. Stuff that isn't just things that they're immune to after a while. Honestly, I'd love to hear y'all's thoughts on other concepts when it comes to what spells do that just feels like they haven't really fleshed it out in a while, or they just forgot about it. I'm sure y'all have one for any school that y'all play, so let me know in the comments. Also, let me know if y'all agree with my takes in this video. Maybe the devs will see this. Maybe we'll have some new spells on all these schools. Let me know y'all's thoughts in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. And as always, if somebody hasn't told they're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Stay awesome, y'all. See y'all soon. And yeah.